Okay. All right. So despite a little bit of chaos getting started, we're ready to go. Um, this is a talk that we wind up giving about once a year or so, and I think it's a really good thing to revisit because as we get more and more beginners that are new to this, uh, right off the bat, we have them chanting the Heart Sutra. And I think every now and then it's a good idea to back up and actually do a deep dive on what it is we just chanted. Because, for one thing, there's a lot of Sanskrit in here, a lot of Sanskrit words that you may not know. And I think it's a good idea that if we're going to all stand together and chant together, that we kind of have an idea of what it is we're saying. Um, so the great Heart of Perfect Wisdom Sutra, Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, it started showing up in the canon somewhere around the seventh century. If I can remember exactly, I think the oldest known version comes from the year 722. I may not be right on that number. I may have to go look that up, but it's somewhere around that period. And as we know, Chan Buddhism took root in China right around the middle of the fifth century. And by the seventh century, it was pretty well codified and being widely taught. So that makes perfect sense for about the time for this sutra to show up. A couple of things that are really interesting about the development of the sutras in China, that when Bodhidharma first started to teach, he brought a copy of the Lankampatara Sutra, which originates from Sri Lanka, and told his original students, he goes, everything you'll ever need to know is right here in this, in the Lankampatara. Everybody settle. Okay. So this was not included in that set of sutras that Bodhidharma brought with him. Most historians think that it does come from an earlier sutra or an earlier set of writings. Nobody is sure what. They've never agreed on what that earlier precursor document would have been or what it would have looked like. Okay, we'll hang on a second. Okay, but since then, this has become one of the preeminent, most important sutras in the study of Zen Buddhism. So for the last almost 1,300 years, this has been one of our most well-known, most widely circulated sutras. I think one of the reasons for its popularity is its shortness. It's only a page long. And when you compare that to the Shurangama Sutra, the Shurangama Sutra is close to 300 pages long. Platform Sutra is a few hundred pages long. So here we have this one sutra that is only a page, but it's got a lot packed into it. So that makes it very interesting. Another interesting thing about this sutra that sets it apart from a lot of other sutras is this isn't narrated by the Buddha. Someone else is teaching this sutra, not the Buddha himself. And what we're used to is is that the sutras are essentially the teachings of the Buddha. This one is not, and there's a reason for that we'll dive into in a second. Um, for the people that are interested in the history of the sutras, the Platform Sutra is one of the only other sutras that is not teachings of the Buddha. Um, but take a look at this first sentence. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Okay, there's a lot there. Okay, does anyone know who Avalokiteshvara is? Anybody have any?
Bodhisattva of compassion.
Bodhisattva of compassion. Interesting thing about Avalokiteshvara, if you look at the entire continent of Asia, the origins of Buddhism, in different parts, Avalokiteshvara, well, she's got different names in places, but in some traditions she's female, some traditions she's male. In the original Pali canon, where the name Avalokiteshvara would come from, Sanskrit name, that's a male name. So in this tradition that they're quoting here, we've got a male. But fast forward to China, where she's referred to as Queen Jin, it's a female name. Carry that through to Japan, she's called Kanon, another female. And Southeast Asia, where there's several different names, some of them are male, some are different are female. And in Tibet, we're back to a male name. So what probably happened here is that Buddhism, as it moved around Asia and was introduced into different areas, it more or less soaked up a lot of the traditions that were already there. So when we see this variation in this one character, that's probably based on a deity that already existed in that culture. Does that track with everybody? Okay, so that's why we see a wide difference in this character, this bodhisattva of compassion. I think one of the things that it's also talking about, and the same reason that all depictions of the Buddha, the Buddha, the depictions of themselves are very androgynous. So the idea that enlightenment and compassion are available to anybody, regardless of gender. And I think that may be one of the things that this is hinting at. So uh, this deity is practicing prajna paramita. So we've got more sand that might be confusing to somebody that wasn't familiar with this. Does everybody know what the paramitas are?
Wisdom?
What's that? Prajna paramita is wisdom.
Okay.
But we've got 5 other paramitas.
Aggregates?
Well, I don't remember all of the Sanskrit, but the first is generosity.
Oh.
Okay. The second would be morality. The third one would be having patience, forbearance. The fifth one would be having energy or vigor. And I mean, the fourth one. And the fifth one is meditation, practicing of meditation. Okay. And the way that I look at those 5 paramitas is they're almost like faucets because you can go too far in a paramita. If you're too generous, you're not going to take care of yourself. Okay. Too patient, you're gonna, you could just slide into torpor and doing nothing. Okay. Too much energy and you're manic. So prajna paramita is this master faucet controlling these 5. Wisdom of knowing how much patience is the right amount, how much concentration is the right amount, how much, morality, where you at on that scale. Okay, how much generosity is too much versus enough. So prajna paramita is kind of like the master paramita. Okay, so Avalokiteshvara was deeply practicing prajna paramita, deeply in a state of wisdom, and clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty. Okay, so the next question is, what's he talking about with an aggregate? What is the aggregates? Well, the good news is if we skip forward a couple of paragraphs, he keeps talking about form is the same thing as emptiness. And then he says sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness are also like this. Well, those are the other 4 aggregates. So we've got the 5 aggregates. Form, sensation, perception, formation, consciousness are our 5 aggregates. We pull all those aggregates together and you've got the self. You've got the being. Okay. You've got everything that you are is your 5 aggregates. So what does it mean that they're empty? Because obviously they're not, obviously they exist. You're sitting right there. You're obviously here, but the word emptiness is used in a little bit different context than we would use it in modern English. What it essentially means is that it didn't arise from nothing by itself. it's connected to the rest of the universe. It's connected to every other thing in one way or the other. So it is devoid of independence in a certain way. Okay. So that's what he's saying when he says that it does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Form itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself form. Sensations, perceptions, formations, and consciousness are also like this. And we see the second use with the word Shariputra. Is anybody familiar with Shariputra? Okay, he was the Buddha's cousin, one of the Buddha's cousins, and so this whole sutra, instead of being a direct teaching of the Buddha, is a conversation between Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra. Okay, so the question is, why is this happening? And the folklore behind this, or the mythology behind this, probably more accurate than folklore, is that when the Buddha was enlightened, okay, remember he had been sitting for a period of time. Different traditions tell us different lengths of time, ranging from he was there overnight to he was there for several months. But he sat down under this Bodhi tree and said, I'm not moving till I figure this out. Even if it kills me, even if I sit here and starve to death, I am not leaving until I get this figured out. And then in the morning, however long that period was that he sat, when Venus rose over the horizon, he was enlightened. He experienced all of his past lives and cracked the code of human existence, why we have to suffer. And that's when he realized the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. What happened next, if the mythology is to be believed, he ascended up to heaven with the gods, all of the Hindu gods that you may be familiar with. And they told him, they said, you're done. You did it. You don't have to go back. You are released from your mortal coil. You're released from an earthly presence. You don't have to go back. And he said, well, I can't leave all of that behind me until everything back there has the same realization that I just had. I have to stay there. And they told him next. This is interesting because it gets kind of contradictory with other stories, because, what we're told in a lot of traditions, the first thing that happened after that was he somehow like teleported himself to the five other monks that he was traveling with and delivered the lecture at Deer Park that we're all familiar with, where he spells out the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Paths. And he appears to these monks that he's traveling with, and they took one look at him and they said, you're different. Something happened. And he replied with, I woke up. So that's one tradition that we're given. But this other tradition, he'd gone to the gods. The gods told him he was released of all earthly duties and all earthly existence. He was outside the wheel of samsara and outside the wheel of existence now that he'd been through this enlightenment event. And he kind of turns down this great honor to spend the rest of his life in nirvana and says, I'm going to go back to earth and teach and help. And they said, well, what you've got right now is a little too hot. People aren't ready for it. The world's not ready for it. You can't go back. You can't go back just yet. You've got to stay here for a while until you kind of cool out and they get ready for you. Which is really that's really a very strange story. But I look at the Old Testament. When Moses went up and saw the burning bush and received the Ten Commandments from God and went back down, the Israelites said the same thing to him. They're like, "What happened to you?" Because he was kind of glowing. It looked like he'd been burned, like he burned by radiation or something like that. So, we can kind of guess that it might have been something similar, or at least folklorically similar, using the same set of metaphors. So during this period, what happened was Buddha spoke to Avalokiteshvara, and delivered sermons to Avalokiteshvara. And then Avalokiteshvara, being a being of such great compassion and that would not harm anybody on earth, gave the same message to Shariputra. And then Shariputra started to teach the Buddha's followers. Because, we're led to believe that as soon as he transmitted this information to the five monks at Deer Park, his followers started to grow very, very quickly. So for about a year and a half, about 18 months, we have this setup where the Buddha isn't speaking directly to humans because they just would not have been able to absorb what he had to say, but speaking through a set of intermediaries. He's speaking to Avalokiteshvara, who in turn is speaking to Shariputra, and Shariputra is delivering the message to whoever is ready to hear it. So that's what's going on in this first paragraph. Okay, so that's when we see Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra. Shariputra is a person, and he's actually speaking directly to him. Okay, so I know that's kind of a little bit out there, in terms of the kind of things that we typically think about, but that's the mythology. So he goes on to say that the five aggregates or skandhas are empty, that formation, perception, sensation, consciousness, uh, and form is doesn't exist independently. It arose codependently with everything else in the universe. So none of us are completely independent. We all are connected to everything else around us. And when you hear people talk about their enlightenment experiences, one of the first things that they always say was, I was connected to everything. I saw I saw myself, I saw my connection to every other thing in the universe, which is a pretty profound thing. Think about it, I am part of everything. That's a big difference. We were just talking about this a minute ago, the flip-flop, everything is me, which is something that like someone with narcissistic personality disorder might frame it that way. But think what a prison that is to say it that way. So what he's saying is that everything is connected, every single thing. And then we go, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no realm of mind consciousness. Okay, so basically he's talking about the organs of events. That's where everything comes into our being through our senses. And wonderful thing, but also can be very faulty. So in this chain of causation, one of the places where things can go wrong is our senses may be lying to us, not on purpose, just the way they're built. We have a very limited range of senses. Perfect example. Humans can't see ultraviolet. It's like visible to us, but that's how most insects navigate, is by what they see in ultraviolet light. Another great example, we're one of the only mammals that can see three basic colors. Most other mammals can only see two. So if you're an antelope or a wild pig, a tiger does not look orange and black. Tigers look green. Just a limitation of their senses, but our senses are limited equally as well. And so that's what this is telling us, because we have limitations in our senses. We have limitations in the consciousness of our minds. And then the next part I really like, there is neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death. So that one is really kind of a puzzle, because obviously we die. Obviously we have old age and death. There's nothing we can do about it. Those are inevitable. And think about it. There's kind of an echo here to the first time when the Buddha left the palace for the first time, when he's been through this period of psychological unrest and he's going to leave the palace for the first time. What is it that he sees? He sees an old person. He sees a dead body. He sees a sick person. So there's kind of this interesting little echo to that. But each one of these is paired with an opposite. So I think that's worth some pondering, and I don't have a real clear answer for that either, other than we set up these opposites, and it's kind of our job in a contemplative tradition to reconcile opposites. That's sort of what we do. So no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path, no knowledge, no attainment, with nothing to attain. A bodhisattva relies on prajnaparamita. Okay, so I think what he's saying there is a lot like that metaphor that I used of the faucets. Prajnaparamita is going to make sense of the rest of this. Wisdom will make sense of a path, a knowledge, an attainment. Okay, but I think with the idea of attainment, I think one of the things he's saying there is like uh, one of the things that comes up in Dokusan a lot is I'm striving to attain enlightenment. I want to attain enlightenment. And that's always a really interesting puzzle, because enlightenment's one of those things that unless you experience, you've got no idea what it is. So that's a real puzzle there, because one of the things you have to let go of is that desire. Because remember, first noble truth, life is going to be hard. Second noble truth, life is hard because you're making it hard. You're desiring things. So from that standpoint, this need for enlightenment, this desire for enlightenment, is totally counterintuitive. It's in some ways probably the last thing we should be worried about. It'll show up when it wants to show up. But once you have learned to rely on prajnaparamita and put these things behind you, now the mind is without hindrance. Now the mind can function. Okay. So far beyond these inverted views, these backward views, and I would include the backward view of seeing everything as an opposite instead of a whole, one realizes nirvana.
I'm sorry, may I go back to inverted views? I'm not quite clear on that.
Just seeing things wrong.
Okay, that's what like
That's how I would interpret it. It's just that simple. Just seeing things wrong.
Okay.
In
Because-
another translation of the sutra, the word delusion is used.
Yes.
That might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yes.
Which is exactly what a delusion would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so go to the Eightfold Path. What's one of the first things on the Eightfold Path?
One of the things.
Right view.
Right, I was just going to say that.
Okay. So if we don't have that right, if we start off with wrong view, we start off in delusion, there's really no way for the rest of this to line up. Okay, so that's so once if you stay on these inverted views and seeing things wrong, the rest of this isn't going to line up.
And it's the wisdoms that helps us to see things correctly.
Yes.
And right view.
Right. See, that's the next line. All Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on prajnaparamita, because we know Siddhartha Gautama was not the first Buddha. Depending on which tradition you look at, there were 9 Buddhas before him, and in some other traditions, there were 28 Buddhas before Siddhartha Gautama. So the idea is that every time these teachings pass out of the world and we need them the most, there will be another Buddha. And we're told and from a lot of different sources that another Buddha will be on the way, and their name is Maitreya. So Maitreya is somewhere out there in the future when these teachings have died away from the earth and humans need to hear them again. We'll have another Buddha, and that Buddha's name has been given to us as Maitreya. And if I had to bet, I would say I would go ahead and bet that the next Buddha is going to be a brown pearl. Just my sense of things. Okay. All Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on prajnaparamita and thereby attain unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment. Therefore, know the Prajnaparamita is the great miraculous mantra, the great bright mantra, the supreme mantra, the incomparable mantra. So that's pretty high advertising there. Pretty high praise. But we're told that it removes all suffering, and it's true, not false. Therefore, we proclaim the Prajnaparamita mantra, the mantra that says, Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisattva, which translates to gone, gone, gone to the other shore. And the other shore is in the Pali Canon, the original Buddhist teachings. In the Pali Canon, that's a standard metaphor for enlightenment. That your practice is kind of a boat that's going to take you across the water, and you'll reach the other shore.
And of course, it ends with having never left.
And never left. Yeah, yeah. So there's this or this metaphysical idea that gone to the other shore, but never has really gone anywhere, which is a pretty interesting kind of metaphorical way to look at sitting. I mean, our practice is to come in here and sit and stare at these walls. We are in essence, always traveling through time. But the other thing that I've talked about many times is this is having an actual effect on the structure of our brains. The longer you sit, the more these changes start to take effect. And one of the things that happens is that what you do in this room and your life outside start to merge into one thing. So in essence, you're always you get to a point where you're always in this sitting space. Okay. Which the next step would be you eventually get to a point where you're always practicing Prajnaparamita. You're always taking time to respond instead of just react. And that's a huge change in life for most people. Okay, so that is what we are chanting when we chant the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra. And I just thought it'd be a good idea if we hit the brakes and actually talked about what was in the sutra as we chant it at least once a week. So, anybody have any questions or comments? I'll just throw it out and see what you guys think. Yeah.
It makes me think of a line from Walt Whitman, who in one of his poems says, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes."
Right, yeah, Song of the Self.
The sutra, I think that one of the principal aspects of Zen practice is the embracing of contradiction, because everything that is put into words is limited in skillful means. Because if you think about it, and I've read this somewhere, sutra essentially contradicts the Four Noble Truths: no suffering, no craving, no path. That's three of the Noble Truths right there. Nothing to be attained. And so it's something to not try to grasp onto and be attached to the Four Noble Truths, but at the same time, don't be attached to what the words in the sutra say.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something with that. I think that one of the things the sutra is telling us to do is think about it when you first got here, when you first walked in the place and first sat for the first time. You probably had a lot of expectations for how that sit was going to go, and I think that that's one of the things the sutra is asking us to do when it says no path, no knowledge, no attainment, is let go of these expectations that you've got of what this is going to be, what Zen is going to be, period. The more I think the more you get you would attach to this, especially with enlightenment. The more you would grasp this concept of enlightenment, the less your brain is going to be open for what actually will happen when you sit. So I think the sutras I mean, of course, there is a path, there is attainment, there is a knowledge, but the path, what the sutra is saying is, I think exactly what you just told us. If you grasp to those ideas too, you are closed off to what's really going to happen.
Yeah, it's as you said, it's a matter of attachment, and I think Hojo-san has told us in the past to try to not be attached to the words of the sutra, but just expand it and allow yourself to absorb that over time.
Right. Yeah. Because another thing is keep in mind, reading this in English, the oldest versions we can find are in Chinese. It was based off of older documents that were written in Sanskrit, based on what we think the Buddha may have said, and said to Avalokiteshvara. I mean, that's a pretty big game of telephone. If we decide, no, this is the absolute truth, we can't do that. A perfect example is how they were using the word empty compared to how we use the word empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've got to accept that, yeah, we can't cling too tight to these sutras either, because Buddha lived around 400, somewhere between 600 and 400 BC. Nobody wrote down anything he said for about 400 years. And when they did, they wrote it down in Pali. Then they translated it to Sanskrit, then to, any myriad other languages. I think there was a lot of translation going on in Bactria before Buddhism was brought to China.
Most of the sutras start off with "Thus I have heard."
That's the I've heard. Yeah, yeah. Well, and where that tradition comes from is super interesting because um, the third patriarch, Ananda, was another one of the Buddha's cousins. And what we were told was that Ananda had this absolutely photographic memory. He was an absolutely brilliant guy. And it's super interesting because the second patriarch, Mahakapasha, was the exact opposite. He was the guy that, remember, the Buddha held up a flower. Mahakapasha smiled, and the Buddha that was the moment of his transmission, because beyond the intellect, there was just this direct transmission of the Dharma. But Ananda was all intellect. And the Buddha even told Ananda, he goes, "You're not going to reach enlightenment until I'm gone, because you're all up here."
Mhm.
But the good thing, that happened there, is he could remember every one of the Buddha's sermons verbatim, and he's the person that turned them all into chants. And so for the next 400 years, they were chanted instead of written down. But that's one of his. They're loaded with mnemonics, and one of them is "Thus I have heard." So when you start with "Thus I have heard," you're quoting Ananda, quoting the Buddha. Yeah, but we can't cling too tightly to that either. Because even Ananda, as brilliant as he was, may not have gotten it all perfect.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sitting with this sutra for 30 years, and for the longest time, I couldn't really grasp even the first verse of it because I was trying to figure it out. Emptiness came to realize that in my way of looking at things, shunyata, which is a word that they translate into emptiness, not necessarily means that it's just empty. But it's devoid of independent origination.
Yeah.
Just like any thought, any thing that we go through, any condition, everything is just aggregated phenomena. Bench is aggregated phenomena. So many different things happen to cause the thing to be made, but it too will fall away. Everything is going to fall away. I think that the thing that I got out of the first two verses through this was that what they're telling me is that everything is empty, everything is worth not holding on to. Even there's no dharmas. Dharmas are marked by emptiness. They rise and fall away, just as breathing rises and falls away, just as everything rises and falls away. Nothing is permanent.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's the gist I'm getting out of this. Actually, could be wrong.
Well, I've always thought it was kind of an interesting philosophical wordplay, kind of like Berkeley and Johnson. You know, that great account where one of Samuel Johnson's students was quoting Berkeley, and Berkeley was the guy that said nothing really exists, only the ideas of things exist. So it's all in our own heads, nothing out here exists. And they asked Johnson to refute Berkeley, and Berkeley just kicked a rock and said, "I refute Berkeley thus." You know, so it's almost kind of like the same thing. Of course, this all exists.
Right.
Of course, you know, we're in this, we're sitting right here, but at the same time, we're not here as an independent thing that arose all on its own. You know, you are connected with everything.
Yeah, what we perceive is not fundamental to your point.
Yeah, yeah. So emptiness is probably not the greatest translation if we're meant to really understood what's being said here. We have to dig a little bit deeper than just say empty.
Even though that on the logical scale of things and the thinking side of things is that since we've been able to look at atoms, we've actually been able to see an atom.
Yeah,
But the atom is 99.9% empty.
yeah,
Yeah. What you're sitting on right now, according to physics, is we're not actually sitting in a cushion, but we're just the resistance between our body and that cushion is enough to on a microscopic level, we're not touching the cushion. Weird. So emptiness. There's something to emptiness there. There's something, I guess, in a mindset of looking at things. There you could say, sure, well, yeah, everything we're made of, we're mostly space. But even the Tao Te Ching said we hammer wood for a house, but it's the emptiness inside which we live. We fashion clay to make a pot, but it's the emptiness inside the pot that holds what is most useful.
yeah.
And so,
Both make the wheel. It's the emptiness of the hub that makes
that's true. And so we live in abject emptiness, but not realizing it in such a way that it becomes livable and doesn't drive us crazy, perhaps. But yeah, we live in that emptiness. It's kind of weird.
Does Zen believe that we are enlightened, but we haven't been able to bring it forth with the hindrance of our obstacles that we face? Do you believe in Zen, you have Buddha
Well,
mind?
That's the original conundrum that Dogen sent Dogen to China. The founder of Soto Zen, that's what he kept asking. That's what he kept asking his teachers. If everything's already got Buddha nature, why do I have to practice? And they didn't have a satisfactory answer to him until they said, go to China, learn from the people that taught us. So yeah, that's one of the original questions. If I've already got Buddha nature, where is it? You know, why do I have to be coming in here and staring at a wall to make it manifest?
So Zen believes that we are enlightened.
Well, I wouldn't use the terminology Zen believes it, but you know, one of the assumptions that we make as as Buddhists is that each of us has the capacity for Buddhahood. You know, and essentially when we close out, we do the closing verse. That's essentially what I vow to free all beings. I vow to enter all Dharma gates. I vow to realize Buddhahood completely. You know, so we're making a vow that we're actually going to do that. You know, and entering the Dharma gates is the only one that we can really control. You know, the rest of them are long shots.
Didn't Dogen say that sitting is enlightenment? Or was that Dogen or somebody else?
he was the one that had Dogen had the great quote about enlightenment being the house and sitting being the front door. Um, yeah, but as far as somebody, just saying sitting in and of itself is enlightenment. Yeah, that quote probably turns up in a lot of places or a quote like that, but I think there's a lot of ways you can look at that. I mean, getting up and coming and walking into this room was an act of enlightenment. Something drove you to do it, and you saw it through. You're still here, and you've been here for quite a long time. So, yeah, you could consider that an act of enlightenment.
Can you, through your meditation or everyday life, touch enlightenment and touch enlightenment and feel what it's, I don't know if you can be at one with it, but you feel it, you experience
Well,
enlightenment.
I think my own personal thought on that is that I think we place a lot more emphasis on this idea of enlightenment than need be. I think that you have small enlightenment experiences all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think you have them constantly.
Yeah.
But I think this idea of, this one like borderline cataclysmic event that everything is different afterwards, I don't know that really happens, but I think small scale events throughout our lives that lead to changes. I think those are happening all the time. I think they're just in a lot of cases really mundane,
They change your life.
but they still change your life.
They do.
Yeah.
They just,
Still have to do the dishes.
it's right.
Okay.
You become enlightened, but you still have to do the dishes.
Right.
I think
But you do them with joy.
John, anything from online?
Thank you, Shenzhen. Let me check in and see. Corolla, Kelly, any thoughts, questions, anything you might like to share here?
I have a comment. Um, I think much of what the Heart Sutra is talking about is that idea of anatta, the doctrine of no soul. That once you let go of that idea that there's some you, then you have the dropping away of body and mind and realize the true emptiness of the skandhas.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Yeah. Um, that really relates to, the Buddha's idea. If when he was asked about the soul, and he said, if you take a chariot apart and you get a big pile of nuts and bolts and spare pieces, is that still a chariot? And it's not. And I think if you do the same thing with the five skandhas, there is no self as most people perceive it. Yeah, so I think you're dead right.
I have one more comment, and that is about that idea that we're enlightened and practices enlightenment is comes from the Genjo Koan, where Dogen says to have great enlightenment about delusion is enlightenment, and to have great delusion about enlightenment is to be deluded. That
Yes.
that our delusions, which are very hard to get rid of, are what stop us from recognizing our basic Buddha nature. And so practice is the practice of trying to recognize and prune away those delusions so that we can see our true Buddha nature.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point too. I think that, and I also I agree with you 100%. I also think that what you're saying is kind of the true one of the purposes of sitting, because think about it, when this practice was first codified, this was as close as anybody could get to sensory deprivation. They didn't have these float tanks or anything like that at the time. This was as close as we could get to actually turning off most of the functions of our brain. We've turned off the motor functions. We're just sitting there. We've done our best to turn the senses off. So bit by bit, we're kind of going through the skandhas and kind of rendering them immobile or kind of rendering them non-functioning when we sit. This is as close as we could get to the five skandhas not doing anything at all.
Well, mind is still functioning.
Mind is still functioning, but it's we're trying to make it function in a different way. We're not attaching to thoughts. The thoughts arise and the thoughts get let go.
And this is
Corolla, did we lose you?
Corolla, you accidentally muted yourself.
oh, I'm sorry. That process of observing what the mind produces is that process to me of finding your delusions, pruning them away, letting them go. And that is practice.
Yeah. Don't just do something, sit there.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That was a lovely talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you were here.
Personal request, Corolla,
Yeah,
could you please give me a call or email about sewing at your convenience?
absolutely.
Thank you. And this is John Lyles, by the way.
Yeah, I know who you are.
Okay.
Have for a
Glad
long time.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else?
I'm touched by this idea of going out and either coming back or not coming back. And I think of how many stories there are. Ulysses, Ben-Hur, he's forced. Ben-Hur is forced to go away, and then comes back with knowledge that he didn't have before.
Yeah.
It's not done. Those stories are not done in a religious context, but um, uh, who was the explorer who successfully, well, he didn't because he died, circumnavigated the globe?
Magellan.
Magellan.
Magellan, yeah.
And so he doesn't bring back what he's learned, but the sailors who survived tell us we wouldn't know that he circumnavigated the globe if the crews didn't come back. And because he dies about halfway through that.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a standard facet of the hero's story.
Hero's journey, yeah.
You read Joseph Campbell that, the hero's got to leave and go through a trial and then come back and he's
Yeah.
ready to teach or ready to provide the benefit to everybody else. Yeah, that's a standard. We talked about that. I remember talking about that one day last year, and we had a guy, I can't remember his name, but he specializes in mythology. And he said that, people are always saying, well, that myth exists in every culture. And he's like, well, wait a minute, it actually doesn't. But it is very, very common. I mean, look at the Buddha. When he went and sat under the tree, he left daily life, when he left the palace, he left, daily life that was expected of him. But sitting down under that tree, he opened himself up to trials, and Mara came and tempted him. And then once he passed through that, then he was ready to have the enlightenment experience. Yeah, but that's a very common mythological structure. Yeah.
to return to the aggregates for a moment.
Return to what?
Aggregates. Return to the concept of arrogance.
Aggregates or skandhas. Yeah.
Yes. And my sense is that what I have learned is all of these arrogance, our eyes, our ears, our nose, all of it is a form of suffering. It causes us to suffer. And the body as it ages, and it was just through the arrogance we suffer. And what I'm leading this to is that when I sit, I look at those arrogance and I examine them and I look at them, and for what I try not to be delusional, but to let it go, to see what it does that causes me suffering. And I'll mention it. I mean, it's really kind of crazy. It's kind of morbid, but to me, it's quite beautiful in terms of impermanence. Is I go to emptiness and I just empty all that out, and then to help me, I go to death meditation, because at the end of the day, all I am is dust, and that helps me to feel this impermanence that of my true nature. I am nothing really. I mean, I am something, but on the other hand, I'm nothing. And at the end of the day, I am just a pile of bones. But my mind goes on to the next life. Once the brain and the mind disconnect, um, I find for some time maybe, in the body of some peace. So death meditation for me is quite effective due to the impermanence of my own being and my sensory, my aggravates that cause me suffering. And I do meditate. I don't attach, but I do meditate on them and examine them and how they do affect my life in a negative way.
Okay.
Another really
Thanks for
powerful story is Vladimir, who was the first Tsar. He comes into the picture in about 1000 AD, and he realizes that to function in the world of that time, that you had to have a state religion. But he didn't know what that was. He's just a politician. So he sends a bunch of emissaries out to study, Judaism, uh, Christianity as it was um, practiced in Rome and in Constantinople. And when they got to the Hagia Sophia, Constantinople, they were so overwhelmed by the beauty of that place. They said they did not know if they were in heaven or on earth. And they went back to St. Petersburg and recommended to Vladimir that that would be the state religion. And it is a powerful version of Christianity. It's still the same literature, but they put this strange. I did a documentary on this, so very strange atonal music that goes with it, and lots of different things that are different about their version. And it's if you've ever been to Russian Orthodox service in Russian, it's a very powerful experience. But that's that going out and then bringing something back that is a fascinating repetition in all cultures.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, I would say let's close with the closing verse. And I hope that some of you get to spend the rest of the day either with your fathers or as fathers. Oh, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Okay. Thanks for being here. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah.